One afternoon, a few weeks after her performance, the pianist invited her to another event. This time it wasn't a small, intimate gathering. It was a larger concert, with musicians from all over the world coming to showcase their talents. The idea of performing in such a grand setting made her nervous, but she also felt a spark of excitement. This was a new challenge, a chance to grow even more as a musician. When she arrived at the venue, she felt the weight of the space. It was larger than anything she had ever imagined. The stage bathed in bright lights, the audience spread out before her in rows of seats. She could feel the energy in the air, the buzz of anticipation. This was real. This was the kind of place she had never dared to dream of performing in. The pianist, who had become more of a mentor than just a colleague, was there to support her once again. "I know it's big," he said, noticing her nervousness. "But remember, it's just about you and the music. It's the same as before, only bigger. Don't let the size of the room change how you feel about what you're doing." She nodded, trying to calm the nerves that were creeping up on her. The crowd, the lights, the grandeur, it all felt overwhelming. But at the same time, she knew this was a step forward. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that small cafe all those weeks ago. She had grown, and every performance had helped her build the confidence she needed to take this next step. As she sat at the grand piano, she took a deep breath. The sound of the audience settling into their seats echoed in the hall. It felt like the entire room was waiting for her to make her move. But in that moment, she realized that she wasn't performing for anyone except herself. She was playing because it was something she loved, something that felt right in her soul. That was the only thing that mattered. The first few notes were soft, almost tentative, but as she settled into the rhythm of the piece, the music began to flow more freely. The nerves didn't completely disappear, but they faded into the background, replaced by the peace she felt when she played. The music wasn't about the applause or about impressing anyone. It was about expressing something deeper, something that came from a place inside her that was connected to the world in a way words could never describe. The audience, sensing the emotion in her playing, grew quiet. They weren't waiting for a show. They weren't expecting grand flourishes or technical perfection. They were waiting for the truth in the music. And that was exactly what she gave them. Each note was a part of her story, a piece of her journey. The sound of the piano filled the space, and for a few minutes it felt like the entire world had faded away. It was just her and the music. As the last note echoed through the hall, she sat still for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then, without thinking, she opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. There was a moment of stillness, and then the applause began. It started softly, then grew louder, more enthusiastic. She had done it. She had played her heart out, and the audience had felt it. The recognition didn't come from her skill or technique. It came from the way she had shared herself through the music. When she stood up from the piano, the applause didn't stop. It felt different than before. This wasn't just a polite response, it was genuine admiration. The audience recognized the vulnerability, the honesty in her performance. It wasn't about the notes, it was about the feeling behind them. Backstage, the pianist was waiting for her, his face full of pride. "You did it," he said simply. "You've come so far." She smiled, the weight of the moment settling in. "I can't believe it," she said softly, her heart still racing. "I didn't expect it to feel like this. It's not what I imagined." "That's the beauty of it," he said. "It's never what we imagine. It's always better." In the days that followed, she felt different. It wasn't just the success of the performance or the applause she had received. It was the feeling of having truly connected with the music. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to perform. Not to impress or compete, but to share a part of herself. And that was the most powerful feeling of all. The pianist continued to guide her, helping her find new opportunities to perform. But he also made sure she didn't lose sight of the most important thing, that the music should always come from the heart. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the joy of sharing something beautiful with the world. As the months passed, her confidence continued to grow. She was no longer afraid of her own voice, of her own playing. She had come to understand that everyone's journey was different, that there was no right or wrong way to play or to share music. There was only her way, and that was enough. One day, as she sat at the piano, she thought back to the first time she had played in front of an audience, the night that had changed everything. She had been so uncertain, so unsure of herself. But now looking back, she saw how far she had come. She had taken a chance on herself, and it had paid off in ways she never could have imagined. She wasn't sure where this path would lead. Maybe it would lead to more performances, maybe it would lead her somewhere else entirely. But for now she was content. She had found her voice, her passion, and she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage and love for the music that had brought her here. In the end, it wasn't about being the best or the most famous, it was about being true to herself, true to the music and true to the journey. And as long as she kept that in mind, she knew she would always find her way. The restaurant was one of the best in the city, known for its luxurious decor, exquisite dishes, and a clientele that ranged from successful business owners to celebrities. The guests who visited had high expectations, and the staff worked hard to meet them. Among them was a young woman who had worked there for over 2 years. She had seen all kinds of people come and go, all while remaining mostly unnoticed herself. Every day she would arrive at the restaurant early, put on her uniform, and prepare for another long day of work. Her job was simple: take orders, serve food, refill drinks, and make sure the customers were comfortable. She was good at it. She had learned how to handle difficult customers and keep her composure no matter how hectic things got. It was a routine she had become used to. She didn't mind being behind the scenes, working quietly and without drawing attention to herself. People came and went, but she remained a silent figure in the background. They didn't know her name, and that was just how she liked it. To the customers, she was just a face among many, a part of the restaurant's invisible service team. She didn't mind, though. In fact, she preferred it that way. She wasn't the type of person to seek attention or try to stand out. She had learned early in life that sometimes the quieter you were, the less trouble you encountered. And so she went through her days doing her job well without expecting anything in return. But there was something that the guests didn't know about her, something she kept hidden. She had a passion, a secret love for music that few ever saw. When she wasn't working, she spent her time at home playing the piano. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old keyboard she had bought years ago. It wasn't something she talked about at work, though. Music for her was a personal escape, a way to forget about the stresses of everyday life. She had never shared this part of herself with anyone. As a child, her parents had recognized her musical abilities. They saw her talent for the piano early on, but they weren't able to afford the lessons that might have helped her reach her full potential. Instead, she taught herself. She spent hours learning to play songs by ear, figuring out the chords and practicing until her fingers knew the movements by heart. The piano was the one place where she could truly express herself, where she felt alive and free. But she never had the opportunity to share that passion with others. Her family, like many others, struggled with finances. They were barely able to make ends meet, and any extra money went toward things like bills and groceries. Music lessons were not a priority. As she grew older, her love for the piano didn't fade, but life pushed it to the side. She had responsibilities, and her dreams of becoming a musician seemed impossible, so she did what she had to do. She found a steady job at the restaurant, one that allowed her to pay the bills, but it also kept her away from the piano and the music she loved. It wasn't that she was unhappy with her life. She enjoyed her work and had learned to take pride in it. But deep down, there was always a feeling that something was missing. Music had always been a part of her soul, and though she had buried it for years, it never truly left. One evening, everything changed. It was a busy night at the restaurant, just like any other. The dining area was filled with guests, their conversations blending into a hum of chatter as waitstaff moved quickly between tables. The clink of silverware, the soft sound of laughter, and the occasional ring of the bell in the kitchen were the sounds of the evening. But this night was different. Tonight was special. The restaurant was hosting an exclusive gala, one of the biggest events of the year. The guests were all wealthy, important people. Businessmen, socialites, and even a few celebrities had filled the space, making it an event that everyone would be talking about. The pressure was on for the staff to make sure everything went smoothly. She had been preparing for this night all week. The staff had been briefed about the event. The menu had been carefully selected, and every detail had been planned to perfection. There was no room for mistakes. The event was important, and the guests expected nothing less than the best. She moved through the restaurant, taking orders, delivering drinks, and checking on the guests. It was the usual routine, but tonight felt different. She noticed the way the guests interacted with each other. laughing louder, speaking more excitedly. The energy in the room was palpable. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something, as if the night held something more than just dinner. At some point during the evening, the music began. The restaurant had hired a famous pianist to play throughout the event. The soft sound of classical music filled the air, adding an air of elegance to the room. The pianist played skillfully, filling the space with beautiful melodies. She could hear the music from the kitchen, where she was preparing drinks for the guests. It was soothing, a welcome change to the busy hustle of the night. She had always admired musicians. Even though she hadn't played in years, the sound of the piano still touched something deep inside her. It was like a reminder of who she once was, the girl who had dreamed of becoming a musician, the girl who had longed to share her love for music with the world. But tonight, the night of the gala, something unexpected happened. The pianist who had been playing for hours suddenly left the stage. No one knew exactly what had happened, but word quickly spread through the staff. The pianist had fallen ill and couldn't continue performing. The guests who had been enjoying the music began to murmur in disappointment. Without the pianist, there would be no entertainment. The event organizer, a woman who had been overseeing the night's activities, looked frantic. She hurried to the staff asking if anyone knew how to play the piano. But the question seemed to hang in the air unanswered. Everyone looked at each other nervously. They were waiters, cooks, bartenders, none of them were musicians. The guests, sensing something was wrong, began to voice their displeasure. Some complained. Others looked at their watches, clearly ready to leave. The atmosphere shifted from festive to tense. The event was unraveling before their eyes. It was then that the manager, who had been watching the situation unfold, turned toward her. She was standing off to the side, trying to stay out of the chaos when he caught her eye. "Hey," he called to her, his voice a mix of concern and desperation. "Do you know how to play the piano?" She froze for a moment. Her heart skipped a beat. The manager's question wasn't something she had expected. She hadn't played for anyone in years, let alone in front of a room full of guests who were expecting world-class entertainment. But there was no one else. The pianist was gone, and the evening was slipping away. "Do you know how to play?" he asked again, his tone a little sharper this time. She hesitated, glancing around at the crowd. They were all watching now, waiting for something to happen. Her fingers twitched nervously. She had always kept her musical talent a secret. No one at the restaurant knew about her piano skills. It was something she had never shared with anyone, but in that moment she realized that this might be her only chance. The event could not go on without music. The guests were already upset, and the night was beginning to fall apart. Taking a deep breath, she walked over to the piano. The keys gleamed under the soft lights, and for a moment, she felt like she was stepping into a different world. She hadn't played in so long, but the familiarity of the instrument calmed her nerves. This was her moment, and despite the pressure, she couldn't back down now. With a deep breath, she sat down at the piano, her hands hovering above the keys. The room was silent, and all eyes were on her. She could feel the weight of the moment, but something inside her told her that this was what she was meant to do. Her fingers pressed the keys, and the first note rang out in the quiet room. As her fingers pressed the first note, a wave of uncertainty swept over her. The sound was crisp and clear, but in that moment it felt like the weight of the entire room was bearing down on her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. She had always worked quietly in the background, never expecting anyone to notice her. But here she was, seated at the piano with everyone's eyes on her, waiting for something magical to happen. The music, however, had a life of its own. It filled the room, softly at first, as she hesitated and tried to calm her nerves. She didn't know exactly what she was going to play, but the keys felt familiar, like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Slowly, her hands began to move with more confidence. The music seemed to take over, and she found herself lost in it. The room, which had once been filled with whispers of confusion and impatience, had fallen silent. The guests who had been murmuring to one another, annoyed by the lack of entertainment, had now stopped talking. Instead, they were all listening, really listening. The first few chords she played were soft, delicate, and uncertain, but as her fingers found their rhythm, the music began to transform. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It was a living, breathing thing. Each note flowed into the next, creating a melody that seemed to touch something deep within the room. The guests, who had expected only an ordinary evening, now seemed captivated. They leaned forward in their chairs, their conversations forgotten, their attention entirely focused on the young woman at the piano. For a moment, she forgot that she was playing in front of a room full of strangers. The piano became her world. Each note she played felt like a conversation between her and the instrument, a conversation no one else could hear. The soft hum of the music filled her ears, and she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The pressure to perform, to entertain, seemed to melt away as she lost herself in the music. She glanced up briefly, just enough to see the reactions of the guests. They were looking at her in surprise. Some seemed genuinely moved, others curious, as though they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. She wasn't sure how long she had been playing. Time seemed to slow down, and the rest of the world faded away. Her hands continued to move effortlessly over the keys, the music flowing more freely now. The soft melody grew in complexity, weaving together a piece she had once learned as a child. She wasn't playing anything elaborate or sophisticated, just a simple song that had stuck with her all these years. But there was something about the way she played it now, with an intensity and passion that surprised even her, that made it feel brand new. She could feel the mood in the room changing. What had been a sense of discomfort and uncertainty was now a quiet admiration. The guests who had been restless just moments ago were now completely silent, their attention fully on her. She saw a few people exchanging glances, but no one spoke. It was as if they were waiting for something, unsure of how to react to this unexpected turn of events. The manager, who had been standing off to the side, couldn't believe what he was witnessing. He had always known her as the quiet, hard-working waitress, someone who kept her head down and did her job without fuss. But this was something else. The way she played was like nothing he had ever imagined. Her fingers moved with such grace, and the sound she created was filled with emotion. It was raw, real, and completely captivating. He had been worried about the night. The event was supposed to be a grand affair, and now, without a pianist, everything was falling apart. But as he watched her play, he realized something. This wasn't just about filling the gap left by the absent musician. It was about something much bigger. She was giving the room something special. It wasn't just entertainment. It was art. As the song came to an end, there was a brief, stunned silence. For a moment, it felt as if the world had stopped. The guests, who had been so quick to judge just minutes ago, were now frozen in place, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had never expected this. Never expected that the woman who had been serving them dinner was capable of such beauty. Then, as if the silence had been too much to bear, the applause came. It started slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the guests weren't sure if they were allowed to clap. But then the room erupted into a burst of applause. Some guests stood up, clapping their hands together in appreciation. Others simply smiled, shaking their heads in disbelief. She had done it. She had turned the night around. She sat there, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys, unable to process what had just happened. The applause washed over her like a wave, and she felt a mixture of shock and pride. She had never expected this reaction. She had never expected anyone to notice her, let alone applaud her. But the applause was not just for the performance. It was for her, for the woman who had been hidden in the background for so long. It was as though in that moment the guests were seeing her for the first time, not just as a waitress, but as someone with her own talent, her own passion. The manager approached her cautiously, a look of awe on his face. "That was incredible," he said, his voice full of admiration. "I had no idea you could play like that." She looked up at him, still trying to catch her breath. "I didn't expect it to go like that," she said quietly, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't quite put into words. She hadn't planned on this. She hadn't planned on being the center of attention or even on playing in front of so many people. But now, as the applause slowly died down, she realized that something inside her had changed. This moment had unlocked a part of herself that she had kept hidden for so long. One of the guests, an older woman with a warm smile, walked over to her after the applause died down. "You're amazing," she said, her eyes bright with admiration. "I don't know who you are, but you've got something special. Have you ever thought about pursuing music professionally?" Her words caught her off guard. "No, I haven't," she replied, feeling a little shy. "I've just played for myself, for my own enjoyment." The woman smiled kindly. "Well, you should consider it," she said. "You've got talent, real talent. You could be great. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had always kept her love for music to herself, never daring to think that it could lead to anything more. But now, in this moment, with her heart still racing from the performance and the applause, something shifted inside her. She had always dreamed of being a musician, but life had never given her the opportunity. She had resigned herself to a life where music was just a hobby, something she did in her spare time to escape the pressures of daily life. But maybe, just maybe, there was something more to it than that. The manager lingered nearby, watching her carefully. He seemed to be lost in thought, perhaps considering what to say next. She glanced at him, still processing everything that had just happened. "You are amazing," he said again, shaking his head in disbelief. "I never expected this. I've never seen anything like it." She gave him a small smile, unsure of how to respond. The applause had faded, but the impact of the moment was still fresh. The night continued, but something had changed. She no longer felt like just the waitress in the background. She had stepped into the spotlight, even if only for a brief moment. And for the first time she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her dreams of playing music professionally weren't as impossible as they once seemed. As the night wore on and the guests continued to enjoy their evening, she found herself lost in thought. The piano had given her a glimpse of something she had almost forgotten. It had reminded her of the person she once was, the person who had dreamed of sharing her music with the world. But the night wasn't over yet. There was still more to come. And though she wasn't sure where this would lead, she knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed. And she had no idea just how far that change would take her. The days following the gala were a whirlwind. She had expected the night to fade into memory, like so many other events before it. She assumed the guests would go home, forgetting about the quiet waitress who had played the piano for a few minutes. But the reality was far different. The event had not only surprised the guests, but had also surprised her. The following morning, she went into work as usual, slipping into her uniform and greeting her colleagues with the same polite smile. But things felt different now. People looked at her in a way they hadn't before. A few of the waitstaff, who had always been friendly but distant, now approached her with smiles asking how she was doing. Some even mentioned how great her performance had been, though most of them had only heard about it secondhand. The story of the waitress who played the piano had made its rounds quickly. She didn't know what to say to them. She had never wanted the attention, and the whole idea of being talked about made her feel uncomfortable. But there was something else, something she couldn't shake, a sense of excitement, of possibility. The applause from that night still echoed in her mind. She had never expected that kind of reaction. It had been a simple, spontaneous act, but the response had been powerful. As the days passed, more and more people at the restaurant mentioned her performance. Even the manager, who had been somewhat distant in the past, treated her with a newfound respect. He would occasionally stop by to chat, and each time he seemed more eager to talk about the music. He would ask her questions about how long she had been playing, if she had ever performed before, and if she had ever thought about pursuing music more seriously. She answered politely, but each time she felt a knot in her stomach. She hadn't thought about music in years, not in any professional sense. It had always been something she did for herself, something personal. Could it really be something more? Then, a week after the gala, something unexpected happened. The manager came to her with an offer. It was casual, almost as if he was testing the waters, but it still took her by surprise. "I've been thinking," he began, "about the performance the other night. It was incredible, really. I know it was just a quick thing, but I think you could really do something with your music." She blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. He shrugged, a small smile on his face. "Well, we host events here all the time. We always have live music, and I think we could find a way to work something out. You could perform at some of the events if you wanted. Just a few songs here and there. It wouldn't be a huge commitment, just something casual." Her heart skipped a beat. The idea of playing in front of people again terrified her. But the thought of doing something she loved, something she had hidden away for so long, was too tempting to ignore. "I'm not sure," she began, but he cut her off before she could finish. "Think about it," he said kindly. "We could start small, just some background music. You don't have to make any big decisions right away, but I think you'd be great at it. And the guests, they really responded to you. You saw that, didn't you?" She nodded slowly, still trying to process his words. He was right. She had seen how the guests had reacted. She had never expected that kind of response, and it was hard to deny the excitement she had felt when the applause echoed in her ears. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sure if I'm ready for that." The manager nodded understandingly. "No rush. Just know that the opportunity is there if you want it." She walked away, her mind racing. What was she even thinking? Could she really pursue music? Could she really perform in front of strangers? It seemed impossible. She had spent so long burying that part of herself, and now, in just one night, it felt like everything was changing. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face it, but the possibility of it haunted her. For the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about the offer. She couldn't get the image of herself sitting at the piano out of her head, the way the guests had looked at her with admiration. She had always kept her passion for music to herself, afraid that it was too late for her to start something new. But what if this was her chance? What if she could finally do something she loved, something that felt right? One evening, after a long shift at the restaurant, she found herself sitting at home, staring at the worn-out keyboard she had kept hidden in the corner of her apartment. She hadn't played in weeks, maybe even months, but tonight something pushed her to it. She sat down and placed her fingers on the keys, just as she had so many times before. The sound of the music filled the room, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was doing something that mattered. Her fingers moved slowly at first, playing the familiar song that had been her favorite for years. The melody seemed to flow from her effortlessly, and soon she was lost in it. The music wrapped around her, pulling her deeper into the moment. It felt like coming home. For the first time in so long, she wasn't thinking about her responsibilities, her job, or the uncertainty of the future. She was simply playing, and it felt good. When the song came to an end, she paused, her fingers still resting on the keys. Her heart was racing. She had forgotten how much she loved this, how much she needed it. She took a deep breath and made a decision. If she wanted to be truly happy, she couldn't keep hiding this part of herself. She had to take the leap, no matter how terrifying it felt. The next day, she went to the manager and told him she was ready. She wasn't sure what would happen, or if she would even be good enough to perform regularly, but she knew one thing. She had to try. She couldn't let fear hold her back any longer. He was thrilled when she told him, his face lighting up with a genuine smile. "I knew you'd come around," he said, clapping her on the back. "We'll start you off with something small. Maybe just a couple of songs at one of the events. Nothing big, just to get you used to it." She nodded, her nerves still present but now tinged with excitement. "Thank you for believing in me," she said quietly. He smiled again, his eyes warm. "You've got the talent, no doubt about that. Now it's just about getting out there." The first performance came sooner than she expected. It was a small event, just a private dinner for a few regular guests, but it was enough to get her started. She arrived early, dressed in her usual uniform but with a nervous excitement in her chest. She didn't know if she was ready, but there was no turning back now. The piano sat in the corner of the room, waiting for her to play. When the guests arrived, she took her place at the piano, her hands shaking slightly as she positioned herself on the bench. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes felt tentative, as if her fingers were unsure of what to do, but as the song progressed, something shifted inside her. The nerves faded away, replaced by a sense of peace. She was playing for herself, not for anyone else, and that made all the difference. The guests, who had been talking amongst themselves, slowly quieted as they heard the music. Their conversation died down, and they turned their attention to her. She kept her focus on the keys, letting the music speak for itself. By the time the song ended, the room was completely silent. She had done it. She had taken the first step into a world she had longed for but never thought was possible. The applause came again, more subdued this time, but still filled with warmth and appreciation. She smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it, and in that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. As the days passed after her first performance, something inside her began to change. The nerves that had once held her back from pursuing her passion for music started to loosen their grip. Each time she played, whether in front of a small group of guests or alone in her apartment, she felt a growing sense of confidence. The music was no longer something she kept hidden, something to be done only in private. It was becoming a part of her life in a way she hadn't imagined. The manager, who had been so supportive from the beginning, noticed the change in her too. He had seen her perform at several events by now, and each time she played with more ease and assurance. It wasn't just the guests who were impressed. Her colleagues began to look at her differently as well. They didn't see her as just a waitress anymore. They saw her as a musician, someone with talent and something special to offer. But despite this newfound confidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still holding back. Every time she played, she knew she was only scratching the surface of what she could do. She had always played for herself, for her own enjoyment, but now with an audience there was pressure to live up to expectations. It wasn't just about playing the notes correctly anymore. It was about creating something meaningful. One afternoon, as she was preparing for another event, the manager approached her with an idea. "We've got a big event coming up," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "It's going to be the highlight of the season, and we want you to be a part of it. We're bringing in a few more high-profile guests, and this time we want you to play a larger set. A full performance." Her heart skipped a beat. A full performance? She had only been playing short sets, just a few songs here and there. The idea of playing a full set in front of a large crowd filled her with a mixture of excitement and dread. She had never performed on that scale before. The thought of it terrified her, but at the same time it also thrilled her. "Are you sure?" she asked, trying to mask the anxiety in her voice. The manager smiled. "You've been doing great. I think you're ready for this. It's time to take the next step." She hesitated, looking down at the floor. Her mind raced. Could she really do it? Could she play in front of so many people and deliver a performance that would live up to the expectations? For a moment, the doubts crept back in. She had always kept her music to herself, and now she was being asked to step into a world that felt foreign and intimidating. But then she remembered the way she had felt when she played her first song for the small group of guests. She remembered the sense of pride, the rush of joy that came from sharing her music. Maybe this was the next step. Maybe it was time to stop holding back. "I'll do it," she said, her voice a little shaky but determined. "I'll perform." The manager beamed. "That's the spirit. You've got this. I'll let you know the details soon." As she left his office, her mind was filled with a whirlwind of thoughts. She had agreed to it, but now the reality of the situation was starting to settle in. A full performance. She wasn't sure how she was going to handle it. The pressure, the nerves, it all seemed so overwhelming. But deep down, she knew that this was her chance to prove something to herself. This was the moment where she could step into the role she had always dreamed of, the role of a musician. Over the next few days, she practiced more than ever. She went over her set list again and again, until the songs became second nature to her. The music that had once been a source of personal comfort now became her lifeline, her way of coping with the growing anxiety. The more she played, the more confident she became. But the fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. The night of the big event arrived, and she found herself backstage, pacing nervously. The restaurant was buzzing with activity, the air thick with excitement. The guests were arriving, dressed in their finest, and the atmosphere was electric. This was the kind of event she had always imagined attending, but never thought she would be a part of. She wasn't just serving drinks tonight. She was performing. She was the center of attention. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted from the main hall, and she felt a lump form in her throat. What had she gotten herself into? Could she really do this? Her fingers tingled with nerves as she sat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. The grand piano gleamed under the stage lights, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The guests would soon take their seats, and the performance would begin. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The manager came by just before the show started. "Remember," he said with a reassuring smile, "you're here because you belong here. You've got the talent, and you're going to knock this out of the park. Just play like you've been playing for yourself all this time. It's your music. Own it." His words calmed her a little, but she still couldn't shake the butterflies in her stomach. She looked around at the other performers who had come to watch. They were confident, poised. They had been doing this for years. And then there was her, a waitress turned musician, standing on the edge of something she had never imagined. The moment arrived. The lights dimmed, and the guests settled into their seats. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were shaky, the nerves still clinging to her fingers, but as she continued, the music began to flow more freely. The sound filled the room, and with each passing moment she felt more at ease. The audience fell silent, their attention completely focused on her. She played a mix of classical and modern pieces, drawing from the music she had loved for years. It was a simple set, nothing too complicated, but each note carried with it a sense of purpose. She wasn't just playing for the guests. She was playing for herself, for the girl who had hidden her music away for so long, for the woman she was becoming. As the performance went on, she began to feel a sense of connection with the music, with the audience. The fear that had gripped her at the beginning started to melt away, replaced by a quiet confidence. She was doing it. She was performing, and it was beautiful. The guests, who had come expecting a simple dinner, were now captivated by the music. She could see it in their faces. Some were closing their eyes, others were nodding along to the rhythm. She had drawn them in, and for the first time she felt like she was doing something that truly mattered. When the final note played, the room erupted into applause. She had done it. She had performed a full set, and it had been a success. The applause rang in her ears, but it wasn't just the sound that moved her. It was the realization that she had overcome her fear. She had stepped into a world she had always dreamed of, and she had done it on her own terms. After the performance, the manager approached her once again, his smile wide. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You really knocked it out of the park." The guests were blown away. She smiled back, her heart still racing. "I never thought I could do that," she admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I was so nervous, but it felt amazing." "You were fantastic," he said. "This is just the beginning, you know. There's so much more you can do with your music. You've got a gift, and it's time for the world to see it." As the night came to an end and the guests began to leave, she couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. She had done something she never thought possible. She had faced her fear and turned it into something beautiful. And as she looked around the room, she realized that this was just the beginning. There was a whole world out there waiting for her music. She didn't know where it would take her, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to find out. After her performance at the big event, everything began to change. What had started as a small opportunity had grown into something bigger, something she hadn't expected. Her confidence, which had been shaky at first, was now growing with each performance. The more she played, the more she realized that music wasn't just a hobby or a way to pass the time. It was a part of who she was. It was something she couldn't ignore anymore. The manager, seeing her transformation, had become an even stronger supporter. He could see the potential in her, and he was eager to help her grow. Soon he began offering her more gigs. Small performances at first, but gradually they started to get bigger. She played for private events, small weddings, and sometimes just for the restaurant's regulars. Each performance was a little more nerve-wracking than the last, but each time she became a little more confident. Despite the positive feedback, she still had moments of doubt. There were nights when she found herself pacing backstage, questioning whether she was good enough. The pressure was still there, but the joy she felt when she played outweighed the fear. And when she stepped out onto the stage, sat at the piano, and let her fingers move over the keys, she felt a sense of purpose. This was where she belonged. One evening, after a particularly successful performance, the manager approached her with another proposition. He had been talking to some people at the restaurant's parent company, and he had some exciting news. They were opening a new venue, a large upscale concert hall that would feature live performances regularly. The company was looking for someone to help open it, and he thought of her. "I know this is a big step," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "but I think you're ready. You've grown so much since you first started. This could be a huge opportunity for you." She stared at him, her heart racing. A concert hall? The thought of performing in such a large space in front of so many people was overwhelming. She had started with small, intimate gatherings, and now she was being offered the chance to play for an audience that would fill an entire room. The fear crept in again, but there was something else too. A spark of excitement, a feeling that maybe this was the next step in her journey. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "That sounds like a lot," he smiled warmly. "I get it. It's a big leap, but I believe in you, and you'll have the support you need. This could be your chance to take your music to a whole new level, to show the world what you're capable of." She thought about it for a long time. Could she really do it? Could she stand in front of a crowd of hundreds and play? The thought terrified her, but the more she considered it, the more she realized that this was exactly what she had been waiting for. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of when she was younger. The chance to share her music with the world, to show everyone that she wasn't just a waitress but a musician with a story to tell. The decision wasn't easy, but in the end, she agreed. She would take the leap. She would perform at the concert hall's opening. The weeks leading up to the event were filled with intense preparation. She practiced tirelessly, refining her set and perfecting every note. The pressure was on. This wasn't just a small event, it was a grand opening, a night that would set the tone for everything to come. She was the headliner, and the audience's expectations were high. As the day of the performance approached, she began to feel the weight of it all. The fear that had been there from the very beginning started to creep back in. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she made a mistake? What if no one liked her music? These questions played over and over in her mind until she found herself second-guessing everything. She had come so far, and now, on the edge of this big opportunity, she was terrified. On the night of the performance, she stood backstage, her hands shaking as she stared at the empty concert hall. The venue was enormous, its high ceilings and grand chandeliers giving it an almost intimidating feeling. The audience was already seated, murmuring in anticipation. She couldn't help but feel small, out of place. But then she thought about the music that had been with her for so long, the music that had kept her grounded and sane through all the difficult moments in her life. This was her chance to share that with others. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out onto the stage. The lights were blinding at first, but as her eyes adjusted, she could see the faces in the audience. They were waiting for her. They weren't just there to watch. They were there to listen, to experience something with her. The nerves were still there, but they were mixed with something else now. Excitement, anticipation, a deep sense of belonging. She sat at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The room fell silent as she began to play. The first few notes were shaky and she could feel the tension in her body. But as the music continued, the tension began to fade. She focused on the sound, on the melody, and on the feeling that the music brought with it. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for these people, sharing a piece of her soul with them. The music flowed more freely as she gained confidence. With each song, she felt more connected to the audience, more connected to herself. The fear that had once consumed her was slowly melting away, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. This was where she was meant to be. The performance lasted for over an hour, and as it came to an end, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. The audience was on their feet, applauding, cheering. The sound of their approval filled the room, and she could feel the warmth of it in her chest. She had done it. She had stepped into the spotlight, faced her fears, and shared her music with the world. Backstage, the manager greeted her with a proud smile. "You were amazing," he said. "That was one of the best performances I've ever seen." She smiled, still overwhelmed by the experience. "I can't believe I actually did it," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You did more than just perform," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You connected with the audience. You made them feel something. That's what great music is all about." She nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction she hadn't known was possible. This wasn't just about playing the piano anymore. It was about sharing her story, about letting others into her world. And in that moment, she realized that this was only the beginning. There was so much more for her to do, so much more to explore. Over the next few weeks, she continued to perform at various events, each one a little bigger than the last. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had found her place, her voice, and she was finally living the life she had always dreamed of. Music was no longer just a hobby. It was her career, her passion, her purpose. Her success didn't come overnight. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt and uncertainty. But every time she sat at the piano, she felt a sense of peace. She had found her true calling, and nothing could take that away from her. One day, as she walked into the restaurant for another performance, the manager stopped her. "I just got off the phone with someone," he said, grinning. "They want you to perform at a major music festival next month." Her heart skipped a beat. A music festival? This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. She couldn't believe it. But as she stood there looking at the manager's proud face, she realized something. She had come so far, and this was just the next step. She had started as a quiet waitress, hiding her talent and her dreams. But now she was stepping into the world she had always wanted, and she was ready for whatever came next. The journey wasn't over yet. But for the first time, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.